Fantasy Football T5 League Beauty Review.
Yo, so DK's out at Seattle, going over to Pittsburgh, which is going to really shake things up in our WR1 Elimination Bracket. So we're going to jump into that in 1 second. And then also the drama surrounding Cooper Kupp with the LA Rams. It's highly unlikely from recent reports that he's going to end up staying with the Rams throughout the course of the season. One of the reports I read indicates that if they cannot trade him, the Rams have every intention of dropping him prior to the season, which is crazy, right? Like, Cooper Kupp's still out there producing, isn't he? We're going to take a peek at his stats from the prior year, and then also he's going to be replaced by Davante Adams potentially. Now, going into this, Davante Adams was going to be a free agent on the wide receiver market, so we were expecting him to end up with a playoff contender team. Is he a substitution for Cooper Kupp? It's going to be interesting. The season may give us that exact answer. And also, does Adams automatically get WR1 status, or would Puka Nacua now be the number one option within that offense? Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So for the purpose of our wide receiver elimination challenge, we're going to first look at the George Pickens and DK Metcalf situation. So AI randomly generated our bracket, giving us our matchups, and then we're the ones just going through analyzing the matchups and picking our winner. You know, with just the expectation to get a little bit more familiar with all their stats, how they contributed in the prior year, and then help us kind of plan for this upcoming fantasy draft season. There's not one day that one of these videos that somebody doesn't give me crap about how early we're doing this, but whatever. So we're going to sprinkle in some news, like you can tell in this video today. So, George Pickens, DK Metcalf. It is highly unlikely that Pickens will lose his WR1 status. DK Metcalf will most likely join the Steelers as the WR2 option for them. So when we look at the bracket and how it shook up, over here we can see Justin Jefferson versus George Pickens. Now, at surface level, I don't know anybody who is picking Pickens over Jefferson at this point in his career. Both are young, up-and-coming stars. Jefferson a little more established. He's done a lot more with his opportunity, I think, and he's shown some discipline that Pickens may lack. I think we can advance Jefferson. And now that DK's out at Seattle, why not let's just do a matchup between DK Metcalf, George Pickens, see who we would start as WR1 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and see who we would advance in this particular bracket. So let's jump into the stats. So we're going to sign in the ESPN and access our fantasy side of things. We're going to select players, and the first person we're going to look up is DK Metcalf. Now here we can see a season total, but we're going to click on the name in order to expand and get our weekly breakdown. Just like we do with all of our football stats, we're going to copy the information from this page and we're going to pop it into an Excel file. That way we can highlight some of the important or key indicators that I like to focus on when doing these types of comparisons. And now we're going to pull up the information for George Pickens. Generally, I like to compare. I'll do the comparison, so I'll enable that option, select one of the players, and then look up the other. But since we're moving this to Excel, I didn't think it was necessary. When we pull up the weekly breakdown, we're just going to capture these details and get it exported over. And we're not exporting anything. We're just doing a copy and paste. And now that we have the information within Excel, we can total the columns, and we can start taking a deeper dive into the statistics. So here we can see that DK Metcalf led George Pickens in receptions, yards, touchdowns, and targets. In receptions, it was 66 in comparison to 59, so only a 7 reception difference. In yards, Metcalf led Pickens 992 to 900. And in touchdowns, Metcalf had 5 touchdowns in comparison to Pickens 3. The targets was pretty close, just like the receptions. Metcalf saw 108 targets in comparison to George Pickens' 103. Now that we've applied some conditional formatting to our fantasy point columns, we're using green to identify any of our boom weeks. So those would be weeks where the player scored 20 points or more. So when we're looking at the boom and bust breakdown, we can see that Metcalf had 2 weeks where he scored 20 plus points, very similar to George Pickens, who also had 2 weeks of 20 plus points. And then, respectively, Metcalf had 7 weeks where he was a bust in comparison to George Pickens, who had 6. So statistically, we see when we're comparing the week-by-week performance, it's very close. When we sum up the totals, we can identify a difference starting to emerge. It's a little too close for me to want to pass judgment right away, so let's consider some of the other variables. The first variable to take into consideration, Russell Wilson. He's thrown passes to each of the receivers. He has 1 year working with George Pickens, while he has 3 years working with DK Metcalf back between 2019, 20, and 21. Now, during that 3-year period, Russell Wilson and Metcalf connected for 216 receptions, 3,170 receiving yards, and 29 touchdowns. So that's pretty impressive. There is a very good chance that Metcalf is going to eat into some of the targets that George Pickens had seen, and by the end of the season, who knows what the results could possibly be. And then we also are going to consider each player's health, right? Very important. Can they be on the field in order to even get us fantasy points? Both players missed time last year. Pickens ended up missing 3 games in comparison to DK Metcalf, who missed 2. The Metcalf injury definitely seemed to inhibit him from performing better in the late end of the season. In George Pickens last week, he only managed to obtain 1 point. Now, I know that each team had their own offensive struggles, so I think it's going to be a ton of fun to watch how the season unfolds. And if you're going to make me pick, who would I advance with the expectation that they are going to perform better in next year's fantasy football? We're going to give it to DK Metcalf. And the key factor in this decision, it's not the history with Russell Wilson. It's not the injuries. It's not their age and experience. It is simply their attitude. DK Metcalf is a very aggressive receiver, very similar to George Pickens. But I feel that he has a demeanor, or at least he presents a demeanor, that illustrates more composure. Whether or not he feels that way internally, I don't know, you ask him. But George Pickens, on the other hand, man, if that dude breaks a nail on the field, you're going to see it up and down the sideline. So I think that Metcalf is going to be able to reestablish a good working relationship with Wilson, and that's going to end up favoring him in the long run. All right, so that's a wrap. DK Metcalf advances over George Pickens in a really close matchup. And if you disagree, drop a comment. Don't forget to subscribe, so then that way the next video I make that you absolutely hate, you can go ahead and make comments there as well, and we can kind of hash out how this thing's going to advance. And you never know, by the end of this, we may end up with targeting the same top 5 wide receivers as our WR1 picks. All right, that's a wrap.